Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today we have kind of like the second phase of the French Revolution. We had the first phase was kind of like just getting rid of the government, getting rid of the king. And now we're going to look into some things about what happened what had happened afterwards. So let's get into it. I need my window open first. Hold on. All right. Let's get into it. Radical Revolution and Reaction. Chapter 4, Lesson 2. All right, let's get stuck in. All right, this is your warm-up. All right, so we're going to identify how human rights were influenced by different ideas during the revolution. All right, your new favorite word. So 1792, September, the newly elected National Convention. That's where we last left off. The radical Paris Commune called for a national convention. It began meeting. They had been called to draft a new constitution, but would also serve as the ruling body of France. It consisted of mainly lawyers, professionals, and property owners. 2/3 were under the age of 45, but most had political experience due to the revolution in 1789. Almost all of the National Convention deputies distrusted the king, so it was no surprise when the National Convention's first major step was to abolish the monarchy and establish a republic. After 1789, you have citizens forming political clubs of varying social and political views. You have one group called the Girondins, and they tended to represent outside the areas outside of Paris and feared the radical mobs from there. You have the Montagne, or mountain in English, representing the interests of the radicals of Paris. However, many many people belong to and that's why I say it's your favorite word, the Jacobins. I'm not going to say it in English because the Jacobin Club. No, the Jacobins. The club, as they felt the king needed to be executed to make sure he wasn't a rallying point for opponents to the republic. So I think that's the Girondins. And you have these guys over here probably writing down what they're saying. Notice what they're wearing, like they're wearing knee-high breeches. They're not wearing pants like the sans-culottes. There's the Montagne. I don't speak French. And then here's a Jacobin. All right, heads will roll. So in early 1793, the Mountain Club convinced the National Convention to pass a decree condemning Louis XVI to death. January 21st, the king was beheaded by guillotine, which we just did in the warm-up. Revolutionaries adopted this machine because it killed quickly, and so they thought it was done in a more humane way. The king's execution created new enemies for the revolution at home and abroad, and a new crisis was at hand. The execution of King Louis XVI reinforced the trend towards a new radical phase. The local government in Paris, the Commune, had a number of working class leaders who wanted radical change, led by Georges Danton. It put constant pressure on the National Convention to adopt more radical measures. Again, working class, we're going through the Industrial Revolution at this time. Moreover, the National Convention did not rule over all of France. Peasants in Western France, as well as many people in France's other major cities, refused to accept the authority of the National Convention. And there was also a foreign crisis looming in the background. After Louis XVI was executed, a coalition of Austrian Prussian, Spanish, Portuguese, British, and Dutch military personnel took up arms against France. The French armies began to fall back, and by late 1793, this coalition was poised to invade, and it seemed possible that the revolution would be destroyed and the old regime restored. So here's the execution of the king, showing his head to the crowd. All right, rain on me. So to take on these crises, the National Convention gave broad powers to a special committee of 12, known as the Committee of Public Safety. This will lead to democratic despotism, where democratically elected leaders began to act as dictators or tyrants. For example, the Committee of Public Safety came to be dominated by the radical Jacobin Maximilien Robespierre. For approximately a year, 1793-1794, the Committee of Public Safety took control of the government. To defend France from domestic threats, the committee adopted policies became known as the Reign of Terror. A temporary measure, revolutionary courts were set up to prosecute counter-revolutionaries and traitors. So if you were against the revolution, you could be arrested, put on trial. And almost 40,000 people were killed during the Reign of Terror. Of those, 16,000, including Marie Antoinette, the Queen, and Olympe de Gouges, died by guillotine. Most executions occurred in towns that had openly rebelled against the convention. Revolutionary armies were set up to bring rebellious cities under the control of the convention. So the Committee of Public Safety decided to make an example of one city, Lyon, that rebelled when the Republic was in time of peril in 1880. 1,880 citizens were executed. When guillotining was too slow, the condemned were shot with grape shot, which is a cluster of small iron balls, into open graves. Jeez. Here you have the Committee of Public Safety. That's Robespierre. That's Marie Antoinette's head. That's Olympe de Gouges. That's a video. All right, virtuoso. So in Western France too, revolutionary armies were brutal and merciless in defeating the rebels. Perhaps the most notorious violence occurred in the city of Nantes, where victims were executed by being loaded onto and then sunk in barges on the, I think that's Loire River. People from all classes were killed during the terrors. Clergy and nobles made up 15% of the victims, and the rest were from the Third Estate. The Committee of Public Safety held that all this bloodletting was temporary. When the war and domestic crises were over, this true republic of virtue would follow, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man would be realized. Robespierre expanded that this republic of virtue would become a democratic republic of good citizens. Outward signs of support were given. The title citizen and citizeness were to replace Mr. and Madame. Women wore long dresses inspired by the clothing worn in the ancient republics of Greece. Good citizens would be formed by good education. A law was passed for primary education for all, but it wasn't widely implemented. And there was a law abolishing slavery in the French colonies. So there's that massacre of barges. All right, so running a country is pretty hard. Because people were alarmed with this high inflation, the committee tried to control prices of goods such as food, fuel, and clothing. These controls did not work well because the government had no way to enforce them. From the beginning, women had been active participants in the revolution, although they had no official power. During this radical stage of the revolution, women observed the sessions of the National Convention and were not shy about making their demands. The convention also pursued a policy of DeChristianization. Its members believed that the religion encouraged superstition rather than the use of reason, so the word saint was removed from all the street names. Churches were looted and closed by revolutionary armies. In Paris, the Cathedral of Notre Dame, the center of the Catholic religion in France, was designated as a temple of reason. They adopted a new calendar. Years would no longer be numbered after the birth of Jesus, but after September 22nd, 1792, the first day of the French Republic, the day after the king was killed. The calendar consisted of 3 10-day weeks, with the 10th day being the day of rest. These changes to the calendar had significant effect on religion in France, eliminating Sundays, Sunday worship services, and church holidays. Robespierre came to realize that most French people would not accept these efforts, and France was still overwhelmingly Catholic. So, not going well. All right. So, as foreign troops gathered on its borders, the revolution seemed to be in danger. To save the Republic, the Committee of Public Safety issued a decree to raise an army. And in less than a year, the new French government had raised a huge army. By 1794, September 1794, it had more than 1 million soldiers. It was the largest army ever seen in Europe, and it pushed back the invaders across the Rhine River. It even conquered Austrian Netherlands. There's starting to be a new, the French national anthem is called the La Marseillaise, and it's very powerful words. In earlier times, wars were the business of rulers who fought with rivals with professional soldiers. Now, the new French army was created by a people's government, so its war were now people's wars. By summer of 1794, the French had largely defeated their foreign foes. There was a less need for the Reign of Terror, but it continued nonetheless. Robespierre became obsessed with the riddling France of all its corrupt elements. So many in the National Convention, NC, feared Robespierre, decided to act before they be his next victims. So they gathered enough votes to condemn him, and Robespierre was guillotined July 28th, 1794. So the man that started all these guillotines gets killed by guillotines. That's the song. This is the battles versus the coalition armies and the French revolutionaries winning. Here's Robespierre's death, and that's his head. New Constitution and Directory. So, after the death of Robespierre, reaction set in as more moderate middle-class leaders took control. The Reign of Terror came to a halt. The National Convention reduced the power of the Committee of Public Safety. Churches were allowed to reopen, and the Constitution of 1791 was scrapped, and a new one was made. So, the aptly named Constitution of 1795 set up 2 legislative houses. The lower house, the Council of 500, drafted laws. The upper house, the Council of 250, accepted or rejected proposed laws. Members of both houses were chosen by electors or qualified voters. Only those who owned or rented property worth a certain amount could be electors, and that was only 30,000 people of, said 27 million that lived in France. That's a very small amount. This was a significant change from the universal male suffrage that the Paris Commune demanded. So under the Constitution of 1795, the executive was a committee of 5 called the Directory, chosen by the Council of Elders. The Directory will last in power from 1795 to 1799, and it was known for its corruption. People reacted against the sufferings and sacrifices that were demanded in the Reign of Terror. Some people made fortunes from the government contracts or by loaning the government money at high interest rates because, wars cost money. And they took advantage of the government's severe money problems during those difficult times. Coup. So, at the same time, the government faced political enemies from both conservatives and radicals. Some wanted the monarchy back. Others plotted to make a more radical regime like Robespierre. There were economic problems continuing with no solution in sight. France was also conducting expensive wars against foreign enemies. So to stay in power, the Directory, D, began to rely on the military, but one military leader will turn on the government. In 1799, the successful and popular general Napoleon Bonaparte toppled the Directory in a coup d'etat, a sudden overthrow of the government. And Napoleon then seized power. And that's Napoleon seizing power. Compare and contrast. So, the American and French revolutions had many causes in common. The impulses for both revolutions grew out of Enlightenment ideas, Enlightenment ideas about personal freedom and the power of the state. In America, These appeared in the writings of Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson. In France, these appeared in the works of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Although both revolutions had similar inspirations, their outcomes were quite different. American colonists gained independence, but the monarchy remained intact in Britain. But in France, revolutionaries overthrew the monarchy and quickly and violently executing the king. Participants of both revolutions were quick to organize new governments based on Enlightenment principles. The Constitution in America was formed through a heated debate and several compromises, but with little violence. The French, you know the French, they do it differently. Although the monarchy ended, this new democratic government soon gave way to despotic figures such as Robespierre and Napoleon. The horrific violence of the terror darkened the outcome of the French Revolution. And despite these bleak periods, the French people remained committed to Enlightenment ideas. The spirit of liberty, equality, fraternity continues to inspire French government officials and social life today. And that's the last slide. So it was a quick lecture. And we were talking about the radical days of revolution. So yeah, Robespierre to Napoleon. So that concludes this lecture. Your homework is to do page 148 of the section 2 review, chapter 4, lesson 2 review, questions 2 through 4. And yeah, hopefully you guys did enjoy that. And if you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Gotta go to class. Peace.